Let's get behind the Mortis. I'm Devin McCamey, author and director for Mortis Maledictum.
And I'm John Capers, the producer. In this show, we're going to give you an exclusive look at the lore, inspiration, and making of our show.
Yep, in this edition in particular, we're going to take a inside look, specifically at episode 6, Poison Pills. Joining us today is Martin Shannon. Marty is the author of this episode, and we really couldn't just pass up a chance to get him here to talk about it. It's really kind of a unique experience because, I've done a lot of the different writing pieces for these episodes, and so getting a different and fresh perspective and take is, not only is it a nice little, chance for me to get something that is a surprise to me whenever I see it. I can act like an audience member for it, but it's also a fresh perspective on the whole universe,
Well, I'm happy to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're glad you could make it. This wouldn't be an episode without you, to be honest.
So, how long have you been writing? I know it's a big question.
Depends on how you define that, right? If we were to go back to when you first started writing terrible stories in my grade school days, then you could say
of course.
A very, very long time, right? When books were written on scraps of wire-bound notebook paper. But I would say, writing books that would have come out that people could actually read, I want to say we're looking at about 5-6 years. Yeah, I would say 5 or 6 years when some of the first Martin Shannon literature reached the clamoring masses.
Sure, I understand that. The jump from spiral-bound notebook or composition notebook to getting something actually out in on Amazon or in another bookstore it's a very big leap.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is.
So, yeah, I get it. So 5 or 6 years though, that's really nice and that's really impressive.
Thanks. No, it was. There was a time, sort of right before the pandemic, when, without going into the juicy or intimate details, a modest health scare told me that if you wanted to do this thing, then you kind of have to do it, right? There was a moment of inspiration that said, boy, if you don't do these things now, you just might miss the chance. So I started writing that first book, I want to say about 2 years or so before the pandemic. And then, of course, the series that started in 2019 and into 2020. And, since then, the pandemic was just an opportunity to write a million words and cement the activity.
Yeah, I understand that completely. The get your butt off the couch moment for me was kind of jarring as well, but mine was more along the lines of, man, I really want to read a book that does this, the X, whatever it was, right? I don't remember exactly what it was. It's been years, but I looked around for 4 or 5 months looking for something that would speak to me like that is the thing. That is the thing that I want to read. That's I had somehow made my mind up that that's what I wanted to read next, and it didn't exist. And my wife was like, well, get your butt off the couch. Just you write it. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I will. And then I did. So, and then, the rest is history. So everyone kind of has their own moment about that. I think yours was really well timed.
Yeah.
For getting to write as much as you did with the pandemic.
That was both helpful and unpleasant and all at the same time.
Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you either way on the show. So let's go ahead and kick things off talking about kind of the inspiration and stuff behind this story. Did you have a question for him, John? You've been itching.
Well, actually, my question was about when you talked about what got you into writing, Marty. Is it something that you had always wanted to do and had just kind of been stalling off, and the pandemic was the opportunity?
Yes and no. It was definitely something I'd always wanted to do, and like I was saying earlier, I did sort of rather tawdry and poorly written notebook epics in my younger years, and often fashioned myself as quite the literary genius in my early teens. But that's what we do as authors, right? But really, the motivation came from a number of different sources. I was big into to role-playing games as a kid. I got deep into running D&D games for friends and things like that. And this was in the late 80s, so for those playing at home, it was not the time that you would do things like that and be largely accepted. So it was a different era. But since that time, I lost a couple of good friends who had played in those games with me. Again, like I said, I had kind of a health scare, and I thought, this is something I've always kind of wanted to do. I knew I needed a lot of work to get better at it. I knew that it was maybe the motivation was there, right? The spirit was willing, but the flesh, including the fingers and the typing, was weak. So it was going to take a lot of time to build that up. And then, of course, I'd had, I think, 1 or 2 books out when the pandemic hit. And at that moment, it was sort of like, well, you have nothing else to occupy your time. I was not very good at making a sourdough starter. So I thought, maybe I'll just write things. So that was really where it got going. And like I said, during that time, I got my hands on a word processor, and I came up with a goal of writing 1 million words during the pandemic. It took about 18 months, I want to say, little more, a little less, to write that 1 million words. And that encompasses, of course, lots of books and series and serials and novels and novellas and, you name it. But that was the motivation. And the pandemic just happened to be the right timing to build the muscle, right? Insert the Rocky training montage, and the Eye of the Tiger music.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. While you're playing air guitar with your leg.
That's awesome.
Yep, pretty much.
Yeah, for those that are listening in the car on the way to work, yes, we know you are always listening at work. Keep doing that. It's wonderful. Boss can be on your back. It's all right. But for those that are listening at work or on the way to and from, or while you're washing dishes or just sitting at home or what have you, and don't know, Martin Shannon is the single most prolific writer of words that I have ever heard of by sheer volume and speed alone, among many, many, many other things. But the fact that we were able to snag his talents for a couple of the chapters in the Mortis universe is absolutely insane because of how much he writes. He's always working on something and trying to get him pulled off of it, even for the tiniest little bit, before he wants to snap back like a magnet to get back on the project that he's working on. We're very thankful that you came over and wrote a couple chapters for us.
Hey, that's kind of you guys to say. It was fun. I enjoyed it. And yes, it was good to take a break from my 3,000 words a day to do something for you guys. It was good.
So with this particular episode, we're talking about poison pills. We're talking in, was it South Dakota? The Black Hills, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
yep.
Why there? What made you pick that spot?
So this was kind of fun. I was in, I want to say, D.C. Or New York. I was in one of the big cities that had a museum. I think it was maybe the Natural History Museum in New York. And I got an opportunity to sort of explore the different exhibits. My daughter at the time is more is a teenager now, so there wasn't as much keeping track of your child as it was an opportunity to sort of look at what was on display.
I love
one
those.
of the more interesting things so one of the more interesting things that I got a chance to look at was some of the Native American exhibits, the clothing, the costuming, the weapons, the tanned hides, the things like that, the teepees, how all that stuff was made. That was really interesting. And then I kind of got into a little of that mythology, and the idea that the Black Hills are very sacred to certain tribes. And it's been a few years. I don't know if I'll get exactly the right names on everything, pronounce it correctly. But the idea was that there was some sort of a giant, I want to say snake or snake-like thing that whose bones make up the Black Hills, those big rocks. And that sort of mother of monsters. And I thought that was kind of a neat idea. I liked the sort of historical context of it. And then I kind of couldn't resist when you had explained what you were doing with Mortis and, what you were looking for me to do, I thought, well, there's an opportunity to use that, right? It's like anything. When you're an author, we're constantly shoving stuff in the file folders in the back of our head. And for some future moment where we pull it out and blow the dust off and say, hey, I've got something here. And that's monsters, and it's also listening to people in line in front of you at the burrito bus. I mean, we pick up bits and pieces of stuff everywhere we go. We stick it in a file folder for later. And, that's how small parts of the people you get to know become defining characteristics of characters in your story.
I'm really glad you said that. That is 100% the same thing that I do. For a lot of the stuff that I write, it's like we all, us weirdo writer types, are doing that. We're just taking snippets of here, there, conversations, people walking by, things that happen, things we read, see, or otherwise interact with, and just kind of combine them into the big melting pot. That's really cool that you had gone to like a museum and then latched onto that piece, and then it became the setting that you were going to use for this episode. Huge fan of doing that. That's really, really cool that you were able to kind of pull that in that way. So then let's talk about the protagonist. Can we call him a protagonist, John?
I think that when it comes down to it, I felt like when you and I first spoke about your Mortis and the podcast and what you're doing, I looked at it as evil gets, for lack of a better word, evil gets hosed by greater evil, and or punished by greater evil. And I looked at that and I kind of thought, okay, this felt rather King-like, Stephen King-like in its concept, the idea that this protagonist is probably a somewhat gray area individual, someone who, remember, we're always the protagonists of our own story, right? So if this is my story, of course, I'm the amazing, wonderful author who's just a gem of a human being, but someone else might tell my story completely differently. So for the character in this short, that's really what it was. It was wrapped up in this idea that in his mind, he is the hero. The reader may see him otherwise, and I would hope it would, but the concept remains the same, that it was a sort of evil receives punishment from greater evil. And I like that idea, so I kind of stuck with it.
Yeah, he definitely thinks he's the protagonist, and he is the main character for sure, but he's one hell of an asshole. He definitely fits that theme that you were talking about, in the theme in the show, really. Right.
Well, and that was the goal. And the goal, of course, is to make him look like he thinks he's doing the right thing. He's doing what's important. He's getting back at a world that has treated him poorly in some way, shape, or form. And it's sad to say, but you do enough rotations around the sun on this planet, you've met a lot of people like that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that it probably had to be kind of weird, for you as an author, writing something for an episode of Mortis Maledictum where, you're trying to fit into kind of the storyline and the theme and the vibe of the show, but it probably was kind of an interesting experience.
Well, I think the story that Devin's telling, and I think the story that you guys are producing and turning into audio is, it's very mysterious. It has a lot of moving parts, but at the same time, it has a lot of open space for experimentation, right? There are ways to sort of, there are open threads that can be sewn up, opportunities that can be slipped in. The world isn't deeply defined in every way. I won't go into, there's certain authors that are very popular who have worlds that are so deeply documented, they feel like I'm reading a college textbook or a treatise on whether it be magic or spaceships or how time travel works or something. And for a lot of readers, that's something that they really enjoy. They want to get deep into the quasi-science of whatever it is this work is. I've never been that kind of person. I vastly prefer books and movies and fiction that don't spell it out for me. I would far prefer to piece it together myself, to have things that don't fully mesh, don't fully connect, so I can fill those gaps in myself. And I think that's what made Mortis somewhat easy, I think, for me to write within. Sure, there's a very well-established mythology to it, but at the same time, there's enough open space that I could add my own flair, if you will, and
Sure.
it would still feel like it was part of the whole. So, I mean, that takes a lot to do. So kudos to you guys for putting together something that not only a guy like me could write in, but could write in such a way that it didn't feel like, why is there this oddball thing in here, right? One of these things is not like the other. I think as you read through it, it doesn't, at least in my opinion, it doesn't read that way. It feels like it was meant to be there.
That's fair. Do you typically write in this genre?
Yeah, I do a lot of different things, but I think, with 1 million words, I've experimented with a lot of stuff.
Yeah, okay, fair.
I write, I prefer to write modern day. I'm not great on historical fiction. I think historical fiction readers have a desire for a lot of historical accuracy, using the right terminology or the right phrasing or the right vernacular, and I just don't have the patience for that, or I also don't have the time to sit and read all of the materials I would to get those kind of things accurate. So I write primarily modern day. I write a lot of horror. I write urban and dark fantasy. There's a lot of times where I'll take existing horror stories that have been long since passed into a public domain and sort of reimagine them. That was some of my most recent work, was sort of taking old H.P. Lovecraft stories like the original Call of Cthulhu, the At the Mountains of Madness, and Color Out of Space, things like that, and retelling them, but reimagining them almost. So bringing them into a more modern writing context, make them far more dialogue heavy, removing sort of any of the racist or fear of the other kind of undertones, and feeding back into it a more in-depth exposure to the madness or the unsettling things. Sort of create that slippery slope so that the reader is sort of feeling the slide into sort of that loss of cohesion, versus being told that someone is having trouble reconciling reality.
That's really cool, and very, very interesting, because thematically, that fits already very nicely with kind of the genre that Mortis sits in. But more than that, the second show, I guess, that we're working on right now, the Patreon Four Corners series, that we're always just kind of plugging here by accident because it keeps just coming up, because it's the active thing that I'm writing right now, right? So it's always like front of mind. Has more of those elements in it than I guess base Mortis is. You know what I mean, John? Where it's like, it's definitely more show, less tell, but it also doesn't hold the listener or reader's hand like at all. There's so many things that could be connected and are connected, but like I really just leave it up to the reader or the listener to kind of pick up on them. And I think that is that's the storytelling style that I really kind of always aim to do, especially nowadays, is like, don't disrespect the audience. They're smart. They'll figure it out, Don't just sit there and hold their hand and walk them through it like it's a show at a carnival where you're strapped in and you're going on this roller coaster and that's all you're gonna do. Let them go and explore and try to think about things, and always respecting the reader or the listener about like that they are smart enough to figure it out and pick up on the pieces. I always love that, and that's one of the things that I really love about your writing in particular, because you're also that way, where it's very, very reader respectful, forward on like their intelligence level and the things that they'll see and the subtext that they'll gather and pick up on. And you don't have to go and explain everything in that case, because a lot of people that over-explain things, just exposition for days and days, and world building for 15 chapters at the beginning of a book or something like that. Those types of books are fine, and there's a lot of people that really like that because they want to get like a Wikipedia read through stuff, and that's fine. But Mortis is kind of more ethereal than that, and I think what you've written fits very nicely in that. And for everyone else that's listening to this, he writes. Marty writes so incredibly fast. He doesn't have any handicaps. He doesn't use any AI assistance for getting his stuff down. He cranks out 3,000 words plus a day every morning, usually before his first cup of tea's done. And he's got like 60 novels on Amazon right now. Is that right, Marty? Or is it some
62? 62. Actually.
I'm sorry.
The 63rd one comes out probably within the next 2 weeks.
Oh.
So, yep.
Insanely
Congratulations.
fast. Yes, congratulations, absolutely.
Oh, thank you
for that. So, like, the fact that you can do that and keep that pace while being able to give readers that kind of very respectful, intelligent, intellectual experience without all the hand-holding, or more like without all of the just exposition for the sake of itself, right? For its own sake, is really impressive. And I guess kind of the icing on the cake for it is, like, I get to experience it as a reader and as a listener whenever I hear this episode and the other ones that you've written for us. Like as an audience member, so I get to appreciate all of that, and I really, really, really appreciate it. It's super cool to get to consume your content that you've created that way, and I can't wait to see if I can sneak you in to some more episodes other places, because everyone else also have really been enjoying it. I've gotten only glowing reviews about it, and you know what? From a production standpoint, I could talk about writing all day long, but from a production standpoint, the fact that you just don't use dialogue tags on stuff, I know that's some weird thing way off in left field. It's perfect. It makes life so much easier on the chopping block on the editing floor for this. It is just like every character has their own feel and their own dialogue style and things like that, and not to have the he said, she said, pull it out later, because I'm grumpy with myself for this. I do it all the dang time, and I have to pull it out on the back end, and I just look at myself and I go, dang it. You know better than this. It doesn't need to be there. You've got voice actors. Come on. And you do it natively, and I appreciate that so dang much.
Well, first, let me start by saying thank you for all those kind words. I appreciate all of that. Going back to what you were saying earlier, I think that the motivation for me it's always been the same. The motivation is I'm constantly trying to recapture the mystical, magical wonderment of my youth. For those playing at home, I'm not young anymore, but I'd like to recapture some of that feeling. So when I write books, I don't outline them. I don't prep them ahead of time. I don't really know exactly where the novel will end up. Now, it doesn't mean I don't write a novel. I'm well adept at understanding something called frameworks, and how we as writers know that a story has to follow a certain progression, exactly what happens during those steps and exactly what those twists and turns look like. I don't even know when I sit down and write it. It isn't until the book is finished and I've had an opportunity to go back and sort of read through it and understand where was my head at, what was I trying, what was the meat of the lesson or of the message I was trying to relay. What was the heart and soul of it? And then once I really understand that, I can go back and revise a little here, revise a little there, tighten up some of these things to really bring that message home. But no, I'm always trying to capture that sort of, like you said, that wonderment, that excitement of when you would sit down and read a book that you didn't know how it was going to end. Or when you were a kid and you watched a a show and thought, oh my goodness, I don't know what's going to happen next. So as an author, I try to do that to myself, and I feel like if I do that to myself, then it'll bleed through into the things that I give, I give to readers to read, right? I've had many times had readers tell me that they had no idea how this book was going to end, or no idea how this twist was going to happen. And I always chuckle when I hear that, because I said, well, neither did I. I didn't know it all either. It just happened one morning at 4 a.m. I thought, oh, okay, I'll go with that.
Yeah.
And yeah, as far as the daily writing is concerned, I've always been a big believer in what Ray Bradbury used to say. And I believe it was Bradbury, and I don't know, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the quote was something along the lines of, I only write when I'm inspired. I just make damn sure I'm inspired every morning promptly at 9 a.m. And, for me, it's 4 a.m., but it's the exact same motto. I only write when I'm inspired. I just make sure I'm inspired every day at 4 a.m.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other cool part about your writing style is one of my favorite authors and role model, Neil Gaiman, says that the first draft is to tell yourself the story. It's to figure out where you're actually going with it. And it's exploratory at that point. You're being shocked as the words leave your fingers and appear on the screen. And so the second one is whenever you can kind of get the good solid edits in and turn it into a more cohesive thing. But understanding structure is also super key, because then it puts your story on just enough of a expectation on what the flow needs to happen and where the twists and turns need to happen to make a good story. And understanding that base foundational knowledge is key, because then you can just be free creatively to do as Neil Gaiman does and tell himself the story. And then when he comes back, several months later and reads it, he's just shocked at what he wrote. And I always aim to do stuff like that, but it sounds like you really get it.
Oh, thanks. But yeah, that's exactly how I see it. I see it as it's bowling with bumper guards, right? or gutter guards, whatever they call them. I was never a great bowler, but if you put those gutter guards in, I was actually really good. So, I always looked at it that way. I looked at it as having a framework. And when I say framework, for people who aren't authors or novelists or anything who are listening, the concept is really simple. I can use flour and eggs and salt and sugar and make a cake, right? But depending on what other things I put in and when, I can have a chocolate cake, a vanilla cake, I can have a cake with nuts in it, or a cake with pumpkin flavoring, or all of these different things, right? Heck, people put carrot in cake, which sounds terrible. But bottom line, it's cake, as long as I have specific ingredients that we'll all stand around and nod our heads and say, yep, that's a cake. So when you're writing a story, whether it's a novel or novella, a short story like I did for you guys, there's a framework of what sort of things have to happen. By n number of words, we need to have X or Y occur. And to put it in perspective, I use a framework that is historically has been around for, I want to say almost 100 years, maybe 100 years. It's called the Lester Dent master fiction model. Now, I have my own version of it. I've been doing it for close to 2 million words now, so my version is a little bit different, but the heart and soul of it's the same. We cut our story into 4 parts. So depending on how long of a story it's going to be, let's say it's a short story for a Mortis episode. So it's roughly 2,000 words, roughly. So that means I have 4 500-word parts. And I know in each part, there's a certain progression that I have to have. I know that first 500 has to introduce the characters, throw us into the setting, create forward momentum, and hint at the darkness, at the problem, at the thing coming. And we have to do all that in 500 words and end with some sort of a twist, some sort of a turn that you weren't expecting, which will drag you into the second part where the danger ramps up and your hero is going to try something and it's going to fail. And this sort of model, this step-by-step model, helps me, because as I'm writing, I glance at the screen and I say, oh, I'm in the green section. So that means in this part, I'm introducing those players, I'm building the feel for the place, I'm hinting at the darkness to come. Am I doing these things as I'm writing? Am I making a cake still, or did I start boiling lobsters? Right? What am I still doing the right thing? And that's really all you need. If you follow that sort of framework, then sure, you can create twists and turns that you weren't expecting. You can throw yourself off. You can throw off the reader. You can do things. But when you're done and you sit down and look at that, you say, well, I got a story, right? I have a cake. I have made a cake. It's got different ingredients than we were expecting, but I made a cake. I wrote a story. And you didn't have to spend all the time outlining it ahead of time. Like I said, that's something that has always frustrated me. I've tried very, very hard over the course of my writing career to be one of those people that can outline, that can sit down and put together the whole story in that perfect 1A, C, E, all of those things, put that outline together. And I have failed miserably every time.
Every single time.
Every time. I do every single time. I can have this beautiful, ornate outline and sit down to write the first chapter, and by the end of the 1500th word, I look at the outline and go, well, that was useless. Might as well just throw that out, because I went completely away from that, didn't I? And it's just how it is. Thank God there are frameworks, and that I can use those to make sure that we get a story, because there's no way in hell I'd ever be able to outline things. It just doesn't work. Just doesn't work for me.
It's really cool to hear about kind of the method behind the madness and how you have developed as a writer and created your own voice and your own style as well, and taken those tools and applied them to your own writing. And we super appreciate that, because like Devin mentioned earlier, this is, everybody loves poison pills. And I mean, I'm pretty sure I've told you this before, but like my teenage daughter, that's like her favorite episode. So it definitely resonates, and it has an excellent flow, I think, in the way that you kind of introduce the Unsigila, and as we follow Mike through the story to his bitter end.
It might be savory.
It might be savory. And maybe it's sweet.
Definitely spicy.
Yes, definitely spicy. But it's a great story. So we just really appreciate you taking the time to come and join us on the show today, and to come and talk about, your inspiration and how you kind of put this thing together. So thank you. Oh,
it's absolutely my pleasure. And I'm tickled pink that your daughter enjoyed the story. That's great. That's really, really great. I'm happy to hear that. There's plenty of other books on my Amazon list, so you just tell me if she's interested in anyone, and I'll make sure an ebook copy arrives in her inbox.
That's awesome. Thank you very much.
And we will definitely put actually a link to your Amazon store in the description for this too, so everyone else can get more Marty content.
Y'all go read Marty.
Yeah, yes, go read Marty.
# read Martin Shannon.
I'm all for this.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to plug you where we can. But this show is listener supported through our Patreon, and as a thank you, supporters can listen to new exclusive Storyline with episodes coming out every single month. Thank you, Marty, for joining us in the digital recording booth today. We absolutely have to get you back in a few months whenever we get to doing God's Country. It's for everyone else listening, it is definitely another good, solid Martin Shannon special. And so we can't skip the opportunity. We got to get you back in here for that.
I'm all for it. It's absolutely a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time to let this author wax poetically about his process.
Absolutely, it's our pleasure. And of course, thank you to our supporters who help make our dark, twisted world a reality, like Serial Designation O, Hecamit, Birdie, Celia, Houdini Bob, Amelia, Trina, Justin, and Brian.
Well, the list is growing now.
That's right.
Now we're cooking. And if you want to join the community so that you can become a guest on the show, we are casting from our Discord community. The link is also down in the description.
Thanks for getting Behind the Mortis with us.
Don't get lost in the dark.